Yes, good morning, everybody. It's a great privilege to say hello. So, dear colleagues, dear friends, and of course, our partners, it is an enormous pleasure for me to open this meeting of the Parliamentary Network for Women Free from Violence, which, of course, I have the honor of coordinating as General Rapporteur on combating violence against women. I really would like to warmly welcome to all our participants and excellent speakers. We are really, really lucky to have so many amazing people with us today. And of course, to all of you who are following this event online. And from the bottom of my heart, I really would like to thank the preparation for Penelope, our head of secretariat, and of course for the whole team, and of course for the techniques, and of course the interpreters who are going to stay with us. We have two procedural items to deal with before we begin our exchange. First of all, I kindly ask our members of the network if you could agree on the agenda. I see that no any requests from the floor for changes. So if you agree, then now we adopt the agenda. And now, of course, secondly, that is also a tradition that we really need to talk about minutes, and the members of the network should approve the minutes of the joint meeting with the Equality Committee in June. It was already a half year ago, and I just would like to ask, can I ask you to approve it? As I don't see anybody, then I think it is approved. Thank you very, very much. And now we can start the so-called real business. And of course, I would say that as we have the conference on mobilizing political forces to prevent and combat violence against women, of course, this is something absolutely talkative. And of course, now I just would like to invite all the participants because this is a topic which is very close to my heart. Our subject is today mobilizing political forces and of course to prevent and combat violence against women. We will discuss in particular why it is so important to fight alongside one other against this terrible and extreme expression of domination by one sex over another. We share examples of good practices in cooperation among politicians and between politicians and civil society organizations. And I hope that today's exchanges will serve to reinforce our network and seal a new determination to end violence against women. None of the links in our chain of action can afford to be weak or be weakened by hostile elements in our countries and society. In order to fight, we need weapons. And in order to plan policies, we need proper tools, all of which the Council of Europe possesses. The weapon is the European Convention on Human Rights, and the toolkit is the Council of Europe Convention for Prevention and Elimination of Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, our Istanbul Convention. It is therefore fitting that in our first session, we will hear from the body which is actively working with the Istanbul Convention and monitoring the implementation, the group of experts on action against violence against women and domestic violence. I'm sure that everybody knows I'm talking about the Grevio. But I also would like to let you know that our days of actions has been very, very successful. I really hope that you followed us, our actions on the Twitter and on Facebook as well. So now, the first session, we talk about supporting the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. And of course, Ms. Iris Luarasi, I really would like to welcome you. It is an honor to have you with us here today. And I know our members will be following your words with absolute great interest, as well as being president of the Grevio, and I'm really very thankful the job that you do. You are a journalist by profession and lecturer on the subject at Tirana University, specializing in such important subject as fact-checking fake news as well. And of course, I should not forget that you are a prominent opinion maker in your country and of course beyond. So I'm sure that you are bringing visibility as well as competence to your role as president. You are also leading the fight against gender-based violence and violent extremism, working not only with women, but also with men, for instance, on rehabilitation programs for perpetrators of domestic violence and prevention. Ms. Durrasi, could you tell us something about the main recent achievement with regard to the implementation of the Istanbul Convention and, of course, of the challenges of 2022? And after that, I really would like your opinion on what us parliamentarians can do further support the implementation of the convention. And now the floor is yours. You have up to 10 minutes, so we are really looking forward.
Thank you so much, dear Ms. Kurmai, for the presentation and also for giving me the floor. Because during this year, we celebrated the 10 years of the opening for signatures of the Istanbul Convention. And this was a strong reminder that a decade ago, the concern for the human rights of women and girls to live a life free from violence prompted 47 governments to negotiate legally binding standards, which we now have, and the implementation of which is being monitored by Grevio, as you previously said. And in the moment we speak, we should say that the Istanbul Convention is widely recognized as the most far-reaching legal instrument setting out binding obligations to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. By now, we have carried out 24 evaluation visits and we have published 20 reports. Especially since July, we have carried out 5 evaluation visits, and we are very grateful to the various governments who made this possible under the weird circumstances from the COVID-19. And I can say that we see a lot of progress in many different areas and a lot of commitment to engage with the standards of the Istanbul Convention. Most of the changes that we have seen during this time are in criminal legislation, and many criminal codes have or are being aligned with the convention. We have new offenses on stalking, female genital mutilation, sexual harassment, and forced marriage that are being introduced, and also several state parties, although not all quite yet, have changed their definition of rape to model it after the principle of the convention. And while more countries are working towards ratification, this year has also marked the first time a state party withdrew from this treaty. And the fact is that not only in Turkey, but in several countries, there is a contestation around the Istanbul Convention. We have learned from different researches that are being done from NGOs and international organizations that you will have also a chance to hear one of them in the second session, that we are witnessing a very highly organized, well-funded transnational movement working to undermine women's rights and not only. And these efforts take place in the streets across the world, in local and national governments, and at the international level. It is important to be aware of this in order to understand the context of the intense criticism, misinterpretation, and at times a downright distortion of the principles and aims of the Istanbul Convention. This convention has inspired and brought changes to legislation and practices in so many state parties, and Grevio's evaluation reports show this in some detail. So in our first activity report that was covering the first 4 years of Grevio's work, we drew attention to the opposition of the Istanbul Convention is facing and clearly stated that it is a way of detraction, attention from the phenomenon of violence against women, which we here are all determined to end. So why is the Istanbul Convention under so much attack that is even prompted a state party to make use of the Article 80 and denounce it? Many says it undermines family structure, but is that true? In fact, the convention has been considered a gold standard by the UN because, as I mentioned before, it is the first legally binding instrument, and the ratification of this treaty means a legal obligation to apply a gender perspective to the different forms of violence which women experience. And the convention tries to prevent, protect, prosecute violence against women, and by doing so, it promotes women's rights. The convention is very important for women because it has a wide scope covering all forms of violence against women, and it requires 24/7 helplines, domestic violence shelter, and counseling for domestic abuse victims, as well as rape crisis centers and funding to support. First, just wanted to clarify the fact that the convention is not exclusively for women, a charge that sometimes it's made by detractors. Its provision can also be applied to male victims of domestic abuse, and it also protects child witnesses of such abuse. Second, the Istanbul Convention does not seek to abolish differences between women and men. It does not imply that women and men are or should be the same. But at the same time, the convention does require action to counter the idea that women are inferior to men and they can be treated as second-hand citizens. In fact, according to the convention, gender and sex are two separate concepts, and the definition does not intend to replace the terms for women and men. The convention makes it clear that violence against women and domestic violence can no longer be considered a private matter, but that states have an obligation through comprehensive and integrated policies to prevent violence, protect victims, and punish the perpetrators. Preventing and combating such violence is no longer a matter of goodwill because it is a legal obligation. And now I would like to go back to your second question for the role of the parliamentarians. From what we have seen from the monitoring and that the convention itself offers, it is good to make use of the opportunities that are set out in the Article 72 of the Istanbul Convention, which is a unique provision that invites parliamentarians to monitor at national level, to monitor the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. This can and is being done in various ways. Many Grevio baseline evaluation reports are being translated into national languages and transmitted to national parliament, and this offers a good basis on which to review and track the implementation of Grevio's finding. Also, Grevio's findings are turned into recommendation by the Committee of the Parties, the political body that is involved in the monitoring of the Istanbul Convention, and state parties are given 3 years to take measures to implement these recommendations, after which they need to report back to the committee. In reviewing the measures taken, the committee issues conclusion and has done so only last week for the very first time. Both these documents, the recommendation and the conclusion, give parliamentarians a good basis on which to monitor progress in implementation of the convention, because the conclusions show which areas of the recommendations require further implementation. Parliamentarians committed to protect and advance human rights for all should predominantly act in widen and strengthen alliances, strengthen outreach and communication, invest political capital in advancing gender equality internationally, financially support feminist civil society, and also enable continuing research on anti-gender campaigns, particularly in specific contexts. I think I'm in the limit of my 10 minutes, or I can add something.
Yes, you can add shortly, of course. And I'm really happy to see you. And actually, I just spoke about your former Minister of Justice with Penelope before the waiting time. So I'm really happy to see you, and I'm really, really happy that it's you who take over the chairperson role.
Thank you so much. No, just wanted to profit from the time, since we're talking with many women parliamentarians and also parliamentarians in general, that we just launched the first general recommendation on digital violence, which includes online violence, but also technology facilitated violence. And this is also part of monitoring process that Grevia has been conducted and is planning to continue. But we also need a lot of support for this first general recommendation that now is published on the Istanbul Convention website and at Council of Europe, because this is also very important, and online violence is a continuum of what is happening offline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was sure that you give us some further pretty important information, so thank you very, very much. And now we are going to listen to our three speakers before I open the floor for the participants and of course for the discussion as well. Our next speaker is Ms. Alia Al-Yasir, the UN Women Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, whom I met last time in Vienna. I think it was the last time when we could still travel before this awful COVID, actually. Ms. Al-Yasir, you have been working with UNIFEM, UN Women since 1997, which means that you have a huge experience, and were previously UN Women Special Representative in the occupied Palestinian territory. And of course, you are a great gender expert with the UNDG, among other activities, especially with women's and human rights NGO. And as I told you, I'm really happy to know you personally. And thank you very, very much that you accepted our invitation and you are here with us. So the floor is yours.
Zita, so much. It's wonderful to see you again, even if it's just virtually, and looking forward to the time we can all be sitting together in the same room. And yeah, exactly, sending virtual hugs to everyone. And it's a pleasure to be part of this event. And I'd like to start by explaining why UN Women is so engaged in support of the convention. First of all, we recognize that the advancements of women's right to live a life free from violence requires joint efforts and joint commitments at all levels, international, regional, and national. Secondly, and as already mentioned by Iris, the United Nations views the Istanbul Convention as a gold standard in the fight against gender-based violence. And not only because of its standard setting, but also because, as you mentioned, Zita, it provides a clear operational recipe that pushes for implementation. And it provides really important opportunities to bring all relevant actors together. That includes international organizations, national decision makers, civil society organizations, regional bodies, and others. So as UN Women, we see our work focused on supporting the adoption, promotion, monitoring, and the implementation of the Istanbul Convention as part and parcel of our role in the region for supporting the work of national and local governments, civil society partners, service providers, and also regional institutions such as the Council of Europe and the European Commission. So it's intrinsically linked to our triple mandate, and our triple mandate is that we work on the normative, we also have a coordination role, and we have operational role. So we promote the Istanbul Convention as that normative standard to end violence against women, together with the gender equality agenda drawn from international human rights instruments, most importantly the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, as well as the Beijing Platform for Action and the Sustainable Development Goals as critical normative frameworks that have been agreed at the global level and which all the member states in the region have signed up to. So as UN Women, we advocate and provide technical assistance to executive and legislative powers for the adoption and the ratification of the Istanbul Convention as part and parcel of this really important normative instruments. So either directly or through support to third parties, our teams on the ground accompany the ratification of the convention. So for instance, in North Macedonia, where you were, Zita, with us in 2017, we accompanied the ratification of the Republic of North Macedonia to the convention. And not so long ago, 2 months ago, in Moldova, where the parliament ratified the final reading of the convention. So this is very much our normative role, but we also have a coordination role. And through that role, we're bringing in the whole UN system in support. So working directly at national and regional levels for advocacy. We work at regional level through mechanisms such as issue-based coalition, and there's one issue-based coalition on gender equality, and it has put the Istanbul Convention at the center of its work, because we do see that pushback against women's rights that is so intrinsically linked to that pushback against the Istanbul Convention. So we see that it's really important to continue that advocacy at regional level and work closely as a UN system, so not just as UN Women, as a UN system, to partner with regional organizations to push back against that pushback. And at national level, we work very closely with the UN resident coordinators and the UN country teams to make sure that this UN development system reform that is ongoing is actually working for women and girls by collectively promoting the highest normative standards possible within respective contexts. And we do see that the golden standard of the Istanbul Convention is an important one. So we try to embed it into the work of the UN more broadly. We also have a convening role, so we bring together different stakeholders to coordinate efforts, and this is being done to accelerate and amplify much needed progress, because when we look, and we not so long ago did the Beijing +25 regional review, and although there is progress, it's really not going at a fast enough pace. And if we look at closing gender gaps, most important of which the issue of violence against women, it'll take us over 120 years. So we really cannot just continue at the current rate. So we need to amplify and accelerate. So we do convene all concerned parties in the region and bring them to the table so that we can have dialogue and improve the cooperation between them. We just had the 3rd regional forum on ending violence and discrimination against women in the Western Balkans and Turkey, and Iris very kindly participated as the keynote speaker in the opening. And this forum really aims at reminding all stakeholders to stay on track and also accelerate progress in the implementation of both the Istanbul Convention and CEDAW. And we connect our work at national and regional level with global initiatives, including the Generation Equality Platform, which brings together state and non-state partners across the globe so that they are equally and inclusively engaged and accountable for gender equality commitments that have been made. And we're really proud that 9 out of 18 countries in the region where the UN is present are part of this important initiative, and they have leadership role, or they are part of the commitment making structures. And there's such high potential for other countries to join. We also have regional bodies, including the EC and the OSCE, on board as well. And we will continue our support for partner engagement across the region, because there is a dedicated action coalition on gender-based violence, and we see that commitments on the Istanbul Convention will be critical parts of the commitments that member states in particular are making, but we also see very strong engagement from civil society. And interestingly enough, we see private sector increasingly interested across the region on this important issue. And we're really proud that UN Women and the European Commission, as well as 2 Council of Europe member states, are action coalition leaders as well. That includes Iceland and the United Kingdom. So I would like to say that in many countries, although there's strong buy-in, what we see is that although there's adoption and ratification of the convention, that the compliance with the standards and provisions is sometimes lagging. So we want to leverage our 3rd and very important role, our operational role, to support, so that even if ratification is in place, we need to support countries to close the implementation gap. And we do that in 3 or 4 main ways, I would say. First, we support the countries to align their normative frameworks with the provisions and the standards, and I can give examples of that. We have in Albania, for example, there have been amendments to the domestic violence legislation that now protects non-married partners, improves the procedure for the protection of people with disabilities from domestic violence, and it also improves services provided for victims of violence against women, as well as the judicial procedures related to the issuance of urgent protection orders. So this is just one example, but we have many. Second of all, we build the capacity of service providers to not only set standards in compliance with the Istanbul Convention, but also implement them. And this is done through the development of codes, protocols, and also through piloting of services. So, for example, in Serbia, 3 protocols were developed to strengthen the capacities of centers for victims of sexual violence to provide quality support in line with the convention, and we were able to also work with them to adapt those protocols in light of the restrictions or challenges that were imposed by COVID-19. Thirdly, we invest in prevention, and this is really very important. We do it through awareness raising, but we also tackle the much more difficult issue of attitudes and behaviors that lead to violence. We know that the Istanbul Convention, and I want to underscore this, it encourages cooperation with civil society, and in particular women's organizations, so that we can reach out to the public and really ensure that the awareness raising reaches most people, so that they are more aware of what the Istanbul Convention really means. And we're supporting over, as UN Women, we're supporting over 250 organizations across the region to do this, to challenge stereotype and prejudice, to involve men and boys and empower women, to promote gender equality and non-stereotyped, or, you know, to address those harmful stereotypes and gender roles in education, train professionals, work with perpetrators, involve the media, involve the private sector. And all of this is in line with Articles 12 through 17 of the Istanbul Convention. In Turkey alone, we've been able to work with over 1,000 men engaged in fatherhood support programs with the intention to prevent domestic violence and promote fathers' active participation in childcare and make it more equitable households. And I'd like to recognize here the strong cooperation with the Council of Europe in raising awareness and promoting the convention. We're working together with the Council, also with WAVE. We've joined forces and expertise to develop a methodology for communications and advocacy campaigns to promote those values and principles of the Istanbul Convention that are being misinterpreted or malaligned across different parts of Europe. And this methodology is being rolled out, but we look forward to seeing the results of this pilot and hopefully bring in other countries. I know I need to wrap up, but I just wanted to touch in terms of engagement or cooperation with political actors. I really want to emphasize that we need to work with multiple stakeholders. Transformation in the lives of women and girls does happen at country level, so the work at national level is really crucial. But we need to promote cooperation at national level, regional, and global, because it all interacts. I want to acknowledge that the work of civil society organizations is inherently political. So in particular, women's organizations play a crucial role in the promotion of gender equality and women's rights, because gender equality has always and always will be a political issue, and it's being instrumentalized in a negative way to promote political agendas. We know that the Istanbul Convention acknowledges the catalytic role of civil society organizations, and we call on all partners to recognize and promote this role. So this is a call to all. This is what more can be done. We're already working with hundreds of civil society organizations across the board. Also, to focus, and UN Women does this and is moving more and more in this direction, focusing on data, evidence, and knowledge to support policy making, monitoring, and accountability. So we work on policy research, but we also work in partnership with national stakeholders to collect that data, evidence, and knowledge. So, for example, and it does bear fruit. So, and after this example, so in Georgia in 2017, we supported a study that generated data on the prevalence of sexual harassment and stalking at the national level for the first time. That data was then used by UN Women and its partners together with civil society as the basis of strategic advocacy and political dialogue with parliamentarians and other stakeholders. And with technical support, the Gender Equality Council of the Parliament of Georgia then took action, drafting a package of legislative amendments on the prevention and response to sexual harassment. And over the course of 2 years, this was debated by the Parliament of Georgia, and happily, in May of 2019, a sexual harassment law was adopted, establishing regulation in public spaces and in workplaces. And I think that this is the true potential of partnership. And just to say, everything is political. When the edict is the personal is political, everything that we do around gender equality is political, and therefore we have to have a political engagement strategy across the different stakeholders. But I'll stop here and happy to come in later if there are any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, honestly speaking, it was a bit longer, but first of all, your amazing enthusiasm, and of course you give us so many information. So actually, I have no heart to tell that because I believe it's so important. But one thing is sure, Ms. Yasir, that the Istanbul Convention has been recognized worldwide as a gold standard and the most advanced international legal instrument to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. And I'm very, very thrilled because you really said what UN Women did or does on the regional and the national level to support the implementation of the convention. So thank you very, very much. And I'm sure that we are going to have a lot of very inspiring questions, but I'm very, very proud of the work that you do. So thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. And now we are going to ask our third speaker in this first session, who is Ms. Andrea Lorenco Marquez, Chair of the Council of Europe's Gender Equality Commission. And of course, she is an academic specialist on both international relations and gender issues. And she is now advisor for international relations of the Commission for Citizenship and Gender Equality of Portugal. She has also worked on disability policies in the government as well. Ms. Marquez, you are under the impression that political forces in Europe are giving enough support to gender equality and the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, which recognizes the violence against women finds its origin in deeply rooted gender equality. That would be the first pretty tough question. And also, I also would like to ask you to give us a few recommendations on enhancing political support, ensuring better implementation, and the constructing misconceptions about the convention. So the floor is yours. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Hi, Zita. It's very nice to see you again since New York, CSW. Thank you so much. First, let me thank, of course, to the invitation to be here on the behalf of the Gender Equality Commission. I want to say hello also to Iris and Alia. Nice to see you also. And I will try to answer the questions that you posed. First of all, just a few remarks. What is the Gender Equality Commission, or Geck, as we say in the Council of Europe? is an intergovernmental committee that was established to help ensure the mainstreaming of gender equality into all Council of Europe policies and to bridge the gap between commitments made at international level and the reality of women in all Europe. Our commission, whose members are appointed by member states, provides advice and guidance and support to other Council of Europe bodies and to member states. Geck also supports the implementation of the Council of Europe strategy for gender equality. In fact, the Council of Europe launched its transversal program on gender equality in 2012 with the aim of increasing the impact and visibility of gender equality standards and supporting the implementation in member states and within the organization, the Council of Europe itself, of course. Within this framework, we adopted the first Council of Europe strategy that was from 2014 to 2017. Of course, building on the strengths and success of this first strategy and taking into account the new challenges, we adopted a second strategy that is covering the period from 2018 to 2023. And of course, that is now in force. The strategy builds upon the vast legal and policy acquis of the Council of Europe as regards the gender equality and outlines the goals and priorities of the Council of Europe on gender equality for these 4 years, identifying working methods and main partners, as well as the measures required to increase visibility of results. Well, having said that, it is important to highlight that since 2014, one of the objectives and that are in the gender equality strategy is to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. The strategy is grounded on the belief that a strong commitment to effective equality between women and men at all levels and in all areas will benefit the society as a whole and, of course, the future generations. This is fully in line with the CEDAW and the Beijing Platform for Action and, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, as Alia also already talked. The strategy, therefore, establishes commitments towards the empowerment of all women, a change in both women and men's roles. It promotes, it aims to end violence against women and domestic violence, the elimination of sexism and the gender stereotypes. To assess the progress in the implementation of the strategy, our commission, the Gender Equality Commission, as I explained in the beginning of my intervention, regularly takes stocks of the results achieved and prepares an annual report for the attention of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. For instance, in 2021, based on our annual report on the implementation of the strategy, we can see that many member states have carried out legislative and policy measures to implement the Istanbul Convention. In addition, specific measures to address the impact, for instance, of COVID-19 pandemic on women victims of violence and domestic violence have also been reported since 2020. So indeed, support from most member states is there, but of course there is still room for improvement, as Iris explained in her intervention. Also, we carried out awareness-raising campaigns and events that are particularly important to explain and detail what the convention really is and what it is not. This helps to deconstruct the misconceptions about the convention. In this sense, for instance, the Gender Equality Commission holds every year a thematic conference. This year, the Geck's annual conference was jointly organized with the German presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, and it was on the gender equality and the Istanbul Convention, a decade for action. And it took place in May this year to mark the 10th anniversary of the opening for signature of the convention. The Council of Europe also held, and this is important, an international conference in October this year to promote the full ratification and implementation of the treaty standards, including measures that ensure women's access to justice. This conference assessed challenges towards the treaty ratification and in the midst of this global pandemic. More recently, 2 weeks ago, and during our last meeting of the Gender Equality Commission meeting on the 25th November, the Commission, together with the Italian presidency of the Committee of Ministers, organized a high-level panel on exchange on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence, to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. This debate and this meeting was really inspiring event, as it counted with the presence of our Secretary General of the Council of Europe, the Minister for Equality of Italy, and of course here is the President of Review. To sum up, I will highlight the strong commitment of the Italian presidency to Geck's issues, of our Commission issues, namely in the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. Here is the President of Review talked about the achievements as the challenge that we are facing, and it showed how important is the work of Review and how is important that the Gender Equality Commission should continue to work together with Review. And finally, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe manifested a strong commitment in pursuing the objectives that I stated in the convention. I would like also to speak a little bit on the work of the Gender Equality Division in the Council of Europe. We have dedicated cooperation projects on gender equality issues that are implemented through the Capacity Building and Cooperation Projects Unit that was established in 2018. And the gender equality strategy provides specifically for the provision of support of the member states under these various specific objectives, namely on the prevention and combat violence against women and domestic violence. Also in 2021, these cooperation projects have involved member states from the Council of Europe, and this work provide the national authorities with tools and expertise to implement the gender equality standards, the principles of the Istanbul Convention, and where appropriate, of course, the recommendations issued by Review. Many of these cooperation activities are carried out to focus to a large extent on the implementation support concerning the Istanbul Convention, as it remains a high priority for many member states of the Council of Europe. Many of the member states which have not ratified the Istanbul Convention are currently involved as beneficiaries in these cooperation projects, include through ad hoc events. So these projects, and this is important, are based on the fact that violence against women is not an individual phenomenon, but one of the most serious and prevalent human rights violations, a form of discrimination against women and an obstacle to achieve gender equality. Grounded on the principles of the Istanbul Convention, these projects promote a comprehensive rights-based approach to end violence against women in accordance with the 4 pillars enshrined in the Convention. That is prevention of violence, protection of victims, persecution of perpetrators, and comprehensive policies. Well, I will like to conclude my intervention just to reaffirming that the Istanbul Convention is the main international instrument that creates a comprehensive legal framework to prevent and combat all forms of violence against women and girls and hold perpetrators accountable. Thank you, Zita, and I'm available, of course, to come back with questions if they... Thank you, Zita.
Molto obrigado. It's a great privilege to see so many amazing engaged feminists, actually, that all of you do an amazing job, and actually we could listen and listen. And I would say political leaders should be so engaged on combating violence against women than us. Of course, the world would be completely different, and we would have much less cost because it's a huge amount that we spend on. So thank you very much for all of you three for this very rich opening overview of the work of our international organization on combating violence against women. And now I really would like to open the floor for a short discussion. So actually we have 25 minutes. So let's try to keep the schedule. But again, thank you very, very much for all of you. And now I need a little help of the secretariat who is asking the floor because requesting the list. Just 1 second. Okay, Marcella Pirone. So Marcella Pirone is the first one, and of course we are very happy to give you the floor. So the first question or comment. Thank you very, very lovely to see you, Marcella.
Yes, lovely to have seen you all and heard you all. And I will be participating in the afternoon, so I'm very honored to do that. But I have listened to it very carefully to the very important informations and thoughts which were brought by all speakers. I have 2 specific questions. One is about the monitoring mechanism of Istanbul Convention, because as a WIF president, I can informed that many countries, in fact, have been monitored, as we know. And now the question is, what is happening after the 3 years of the recommendations issued by the Committee of the Parties of the Council of Europe? Because we have already the first countries, I know Austria, Albania, Denmark, and so on, who have finished their 3 years period where the states have to show what they did with these recommendations. How is this going to be valued, monitored? Is there already an experience, or what can we expect about this? That's my first question. I think I leave it for now. If others have other questions, otherwise then I can do my second one. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So who would like to make a comment? Any of our great speakers? Can I get a little help, because now I see
Mrs. Luarasi has asked for the floor, so she will reply on behalf of Grevio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcela, for the question. Actually, I responded. I thought that this will give us room for reinforcing that previous findings, as you rightly mentioned, are turned into recommendation by the Committee of the Parties. And you know very well that the Committee of the Parties is a political body that it is involved in the monitoring process of the convention. And state parties were given 3 years to take measures after the baseline evaluation is conducted in order to implement the recommendations that are being given from Grevio. And they need to report back to the committee. And as you rightly mentioned, 4 countries reported back to the committee on December 7th. And then the committee issues conclusion. And it was done so last week for the first time. Some of the recommendations dropped and some of them have been reinforced, have been reinstated. And now all the documents, I mean the baseline evaluation, but also this reviewing, they are there, and they are also for the parliamentarians that are here today, a good basis on which to monitor the progress in implementation of the convention, because the conclusions show which areas of the recommendation require further implementation. And to our big pleasure, they have been accepted from all state countries that had their turn in the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Is any of the 2 other speakers would like to make any comment on that? Because that would be a great occasion. And now I can also see who is the next who asked the floor. Karina Olsson, who has been the chair of SCRINER for long, long years, and she's my great partner. So then let's listen to Karina Olsson, and if any of the 2 speakers would like to make any further comment, then of course we can still do that. Karina, lovely to see you. Good day, good day.
Thank you very much, Sita, and thank you for this that we have heard in this morning. And it's very good that there are so many countries who work with the Istanbul Convention. And in Sweden we have good legislation, but at the same time we can see that violence in the relationship with youngsters, that even young boys make violence against young girls in their relations. So I think it's increasing, and we can also see this sexual abuse during the pandemic, that they look more on pornography, violent pornography, and so we can see that this had increased, and these big companies who sell and also distribute this and make offers during the pandemic. And how can we work more for prevention so we can stop this violence against young girls and also, of course, women? Because now we can see that we meet this when it has happened and give support and so on, and have good legislation so we can follow up if it has happened. But we must work more with prevention. And have you good news, or if it's some good example? As you said, we can see that companies and civil societies and so on will make differences, but there are not so many good examples that we can follow up.
Thank you very, very much. And I really would like to use the opportunity, as a Swedish colleague of mine has been speaking, that Magdalena Andersson is the first female prime minister in Sweden. I really would like to congratulate. I would say that she has been a great minister of finance, but now in the whole Scandinavia, you have a women prime minister, Iceland as well. So it's a really good feeling, you know, to see that we have more and more women leaders. So thank you very much, Karina. And my question is for our great three speakers who would like to make a comment.
Mrs. Al-Yasir will take the floor to answer.
Yes. The problem is that my system is pretty slow with the answer, but thank you very much, Penelope, to help me. So, Alia, the floor is yours.
Yes, I mean, thank you for the question, and I wish I had more good news, but I wanted actually to offer more of a reflection that I think what you're talking about is one of the key issues that we have now embedded into our strategic framework over the next 4 years. That's something that we really need to unlock, because, you know, our reflection is that we're talking about, I don't know, I'm hearing my echo. I don't know if the audio is fine at your end.
No, excuse me, Mrs. Al-Yasir. Do you have a telephone or another computer on? Perhaps it's creating an echo?
No.
No, okay. Try again, perhaps.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, I can't. Yes, it seems good.
Okay. Okay, good. So what I was saying is that it's actually an issue that we continue to grapple with, and we've been addressing it in the past 4 years, but now we're going to be putting more attention on it, because I think we really, so much has been invested in awareness raising, with the assumption that awareness is going to lead to prevention. But as I touched on in my intervention, we really need to make that shift from awareness to change in attitudes, and most critically from attitude to change in behavior. But because this is all about power dynamics and power relations, we really need to have a different lens through which we look at this, so that we're moving beyond just talking about engaging with men and boys, but engaging with men and boys in unpacking some of these complex issues, but also a whole of society approach. And again, I'd like to emphasize the really critical role of civil society organizations and the need to repoliticize their work and ensure that financing for them is not projectized, so that they are able to think through these challenges and design and test approaches that are going to bring about this kind of change. So I really truly believe that this is the critical part of it. So I think in whatever we do, we have to always have an analysis of power relations. So, and also this means that when we're engaging with younger people, we have to be also aware of how we're engaging with them. We need to partner with them, not come in and tell them what they need to do, but really work more closely with them through this concept of sort of feminist principles of leadership and power sharing, so that they are helping us all to co-create. So when I'm talking about civil society, I think, of course, women's organizations are experts, but we need to bring in the younger generation if we're going to address those issues. So I really truly believe in collaboration. I really believe that we need to be talking about experimenting with new ideas, creating a space for us to learn when it doesn't work, and not make assumptions that just increased awareness or better attitudes are going to lead to those behavior changes. We really need to think in different ways. So I wish I had better news for you, but what I see through our programming is when we co-create, when we partner, when we disrupt some of those power relations, when we're getting the fathers more engaged and helping us to think in the programming, we're getting better results or more promising results. But I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I would recommend the gender lens, you know, to go through, and everything would be absolutely completely different. Andrea, comment, so could you go ahead, please?
Okay, thank you, Zita. Okay, it's just a few remarks to answer on the. We, of course, this, as Karin was saying, of course, the COVID-19 has exposed further women and girls to this online gender-based violence and sexual violence online. And I would, of course, maybe Iris will speak. The Grevio just launched the first recommendation on cyber violence. So I think Iris will talk about that. On my way in the Gender Equality Commission, we adopted in 2019 the first recommendation on combating sexism, and of course the online violence. It's one of the main issues that is important, that is in our recommendation. So I think we in the Council of Europe have already tools at the disposal of the member states in order to combat this phenomenon of the cyber violence and violence against women and girls online. It was just to mention our important role in combating sexism and online. For instance, we had with the European Women's Lobby, we had campaigns on this recommendation in several member states, including, for instance, in my own country. That is still and one of the things that we are trying to combat is the online violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very thrilled because this afternoon Rika Shafran, who is a Hungarian feminist, by the way, she's the new president of the European Women's Lobby. She's going to be with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, I can't be with you this afternoon, but I'm sure that this is going to be also a pretty rich debate. And of course, the floor is now to Iris.
Thank you so much, even for the question and for the opportunity. As our contribution to the 25th of November, the first day of 16 days of activism, we published our first general recommendation, and with this document, we put forward a list of recommendations that state parties can take to apply the standards of the Istanbul Convention, more specifically to the many digital forms of violence that women and girls experience. And this had always been implicit in the convention, but now we have a very important tool. We have a checklist of measures that is available to all, and it shows how many forms of behavior online and through digital means come within the remit of the criminal behavior set out in the convention: sexual harassment, stalking, and psychological violence. Whether this is a non-consensual sharing of images or videos, upskirting, creep shots, or stalking a woman online through stalker and spyware, by impersonating her, soliciting sex in her name, these are forms of violence that need to be addressed, and some are known as sexist hate speech, as mentioned from Andres, and but can actually amount to sexual harassment within the definition of the Istanbul Convention. So here we drew the link to the recommendation on preventing and combating sexism, because sexist behavior such as sexist hate speech is indeed often only the beginning and may escalate to or incite violence behavior. So that's why I profit from this chance, and I invite you all to take a look at our general recommendation that it is available on the Istanbul Convention website, and help us give it practical relevance.
Thank you very much. I strongly believe that I could not agree more than with you in the last sentence. My question is anybody else who would like to make a comment? Because now I don't see anybody on the request list. Okay, so then let's, as we still have got a little time, I really would like to ask all of the three speakers just to make a statement. We are going to have Christmas and New Year, so what would you wish if you should have a short message concerning the gold standard? So if any of you could make a very short statement, and this is a type of wish list, so let's put it in this way. So who would like to start? Ali, can you start, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to link it to this whole generation equality initiative, which came about because we're not doing well enough globally as the world in terms of achieving gender equality by 2030, which is supposedly the cutoff date. And so this is where the idea of having this multi-stakeholder initiative that brings everybody together and puts commitments in place. So my two wishes, I have two wishes for the new year. One, that more member states see that ratification of the Istanbul Convention is a very solid commitment that they can have as part of this global initiative to signal the intent to seriously tackle the issue of violence against women and girls. So inviting member states that have signed that have not yet ratified to do so, and those who have not even signed to do so, because this sends a strong global signal. And invite also non-Council of Europe member states to also come on board. This is not just for Council of Europe members. So I really hope that through this global initiative, we can amplify the potential of this instrument. Second wish is, and also in the spirit of generation equality, is to encourage more financing towards the work of women's civil society organizations. We really need more women's organizations on the ground to push back against that pushback, to do that political work, to promote gender equality, to change attitudes and behaviors, and to really make that change that we aspire to actually happen. And particularly young women's organizations. We need to make sure that the torch is being passed to the next generation so that they continue this work moving forward. So those are my two wishes, and I hope that they will come true. Thank you so much, Zita, and also to the panelists, Andrea and Iris, for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think we well received your message, and actually, I believe that if I can ask our dear head of secretariat that we could make a wish list, what we wish for next year. So I'm sure that every of your request is well noted, and we can even do a campaign, because I can tell you that the generation equality initiative is absolutely crucial, and I believe that still not enough women knows about, and we know that information is power. So that's why, you know, men are still much stronger in power game. And I definitely agree with you that we need more money for the civil society organization. And you know, as I'm coming from Hungary, I don't want to complain why they spend the money on which they should spend on women's rights and gender equality. So thank you very, very much. It is really great. And now, Iris, your wish list comes.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Actually, I share the same wish with Alia for having more member states ratifying the convention, and also countries that are outside, like we have the case of Kazakhstan and Tunisia that are being also commending to join the Istanbul Convention. So that's the first wish, but also by living in a society where a lot of backlash and a lot of funds are investing in this gender ideology. My wish is that human rights advocates and progressive governments and progressive parliamentarians that believe in the unstoppable progress of human rights, they should spend a lot of more time and a lot of funds also to take seriously and to respond adequately to the backlash of the convention. Thank you.
Andrea? Yes?
Yes, I was trying. Okay, thank you, Zita. Well, just to finish, of course, I will join my wishes and my voices to Iris and Alia, of course, for my wishes for the next year, and of course to continue our work in the Gender Equality Commission and the Council of Europe in order to achieve the advancement and the empowerment of all women and girls in order to have an effective realization of the gender equality in all member states. So those are my best wishes for 2022. Thank you so much, Zita.
Yes, thank you very, very much for this absolutely rich discussion. And I really wish you all the best from the bottom of my heart. And again, let's hope that we keep in touch. And if you have any information that you would like to share, don't hesitate to send it to our secretariat. I think it's also important to share the information. So if you think there is anything that we can tweet or we can make a comment on, of course, we are always at your disposal, because we are much stronger together. Never forget, dear friends, dear sisters, if I should say so. And now we could go to the second section, which is going to be the political action to counter attacks against the Istanbul Convention, which is, of course, very closely linked to the first. And of course, that was our intention, by the way. And of course, political action to promote and the Istanbul Convention and its implementation is absolutely vital for us, but not vital for everyone. And I think that we will now hear some of the ways in which and should be absolutely supported. And we are going to start with the Senator Fiona O'Loughlin, who is our first speaker. She is the chair of the Irish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And I know that she has been a community activist in her country and region for many, many years. So she has a huge background information and experience on the ground as well. Ms. O'Loughlin, I really would like you to give us some insight into the situation in Ireland and action taken at political level to support the implementation of the convention. And I also would like to ask you to give us some ideas about how parliamentary initiatives contribute to countering attacks against the convention. So you have 8 to 10 minutes, and of course the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I hope that everything is technically in order. Very good. So, dear Senator, the floor is yours.
Here we go. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There's always these tiny little glitches at the last minute with technical, but I've been following the conversation and it's been really interesting so far. And just excuse me because I'm having a technical problem here too. But I think it's hugely important that we look at the Istanbul Convention 10 years on and that we assess where we are. And one of the previous speakers spoke about the importance of monitoring, which obviously is hugely important. But I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you a little bit about the parliamentary situation in Ireland and about how we set about ratifying the convention, which is hugely important. So there's, you know, there is no doubt, and I think we always have to say it, that the Istanbul Convention provides a very comprehensive framework to prevent, prosecute and eliminate violence against women and domestic violence and violence such as physical and psychological abuse, rape and FGM. And the convention, I know, recognises the facts that there is a gender dimension to this violence, which is primarily carried out by men against women. And this structural element means that changes are needed to our systems and have been needed over the last 10 years of policing, of courts and social services. And of course, we acknowledge that in some quarters, the debate about the convention is not about this horrific violence that, you know, we speak about. Instead, the debate is about, and I say this in inverted commas, family values, with the convention falsely portrayed as a means of undermining the family. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And of course, tackling this domestic, sexual and gender-based violence in all of its forms is a priority for my government, for my country, and for the Department of Justice, which takes the lead responsibility within the Irish government to tackle the violence. So when I cast my mind back to 2015, the government at the time said that ratifying the convention was an absolute priority for them at that time. And they set about putting into place different pieces of legislation that were going to enable them to do that. And they spent 4 years putting this in place. So we had, in the programme for government in 2015, we included a commitment to implement the Istanbul Convention as a legal instrument in the fight really against domestic and sexual violence. And at the time, an action plan was put in place that contained the legislative and administrative actions that were identified as being necessary to enable Ireland's ratification of the convention. And these actions were incorporated into our second national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, which was published in January 2016. And I think something important to mention was that these actions were widely supported by the NGO bodies that were working in the domestic and sexual violence sector, including those who sit on the monitoring committee. And that was key, having that type of engagement and that type of endorsement. So basically there were 4 pieces of legislation that were enacted that were hugely important. So we brought in a Victims of Crime Act in 2017, which gave all victims of crime an entitlement to information about the criminal justice system and their case, and supports special measures during investigation. We also brought in that year the Criminal Justice Sexual Offences Act, which enhanced the protections to some of the most vulnerable people in the community. And the Act introduced a statutory definition of consent, which provided legal clarity. The following year, the Domestic Violence Act in 2018 was a major step towards Ireland's ratification. And that basically improved the legal protections available to victims of domestic violence. And it delivered on a number of Istanbul Conventions, such as the introduction of a new criminal offence of forced marriage and extending access to emergency barring orders. And then there was one other piece, which was the criminal law Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act in 2019, and that was signed into law the 5th of March 2019, which paved the way for ratification. And since then, we've been working on 2 more laws, COCO's law, which came into force in 2021, and that basically created new offences concerning the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. And there's new legislation coming in place now about the management and monitoring of sex offenders in the community. So other actions that were needed and were put in place were the development and delivery of education and training modules to specific target groups in the public sector, and that include our police force, the courts services, the Child and Family Agency, and our health service executive. And that was really important, that, you know, all of those that would come in contact with victims would have had that training in place. 2 national 24-hour helplines to respond to the issues of domestic violence and sexual violence, and the provision of support for child witnesses of domestic and sexual violence. So with all of those measures put in place, Ireland was ready to ratify the Istanbul Convention on the 8th of March 2019, which was the International Women's Day. And we had a very high visibility public announcement following a special government meeting, which was held to mark that. And there was a lot of media attention at that stage. And that was obviously very important, just to show everyone in the country, and indeed show our international community, that we were taking this very seriously. And in fact, on the same day, formal ratification took place at a ceremony at the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. And the convention is now fully implemented across all state bodies, including our police force and the whole courts service. And so where are we now? Well, the 3rd national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is now underway, because we realise we cannot sit still. We always have to try and improve to deliver. And this strategy places a priority on prevention and reduction, and will include a national preventative strategy. And this, of course, has been developed again with 2 main NGOs, the National Women's Council of Ireland and Safe Ireland, who give expert support. And it's going to be ambitious, and it'll be guided and structured in such a way as to facilitate both the implementation and the monitoring of the 4 pillars: prevention, protection, prosecution and coordinated policies. And our intention is that this strategy will focus on outcomes and will work back from those to identify not just the key actions, but the resource commitments that are needed for delivery. So we're expecting that by the end of this year, and we will have a focused public consultation process early in 2022. So there'll be an annual implementation plan that will be delivered at the same time. We've also put in place work around supporting a victim's journey, which is a plan to help victims and vulnerable witnesses in sexual violence cases. And basically we had a review called an O'Malley Review, which was published in August 2020. It contains 52 different actions to help support vulnerable witnesses. So again, we've had a number of other actions from that. For example, the rollout of Garda Protective Service units, and that's right across all divisions. That's within our Gardaí. And there was a review of all the victims of crime, and that's obviously hugely important. And acknowledging that long-term funding commitments are hugely important. So, for example, this year, an extra amount of 13.5 million was put in place in terms of supporting victims for crime, and this was rolled out to NGOs and specific domestic violence intervention programs. It's supporting a number of frontline activities, such as giving supports to witnesses going to court, that they would have somebody accompanying them, which obviously is hugely important, to continue the work with the Gardaí and to continue the work with our refuges that we have, and they're putting in place specific supports like counselling supports for children, etc. and the frontline organisations such as the family support services that I mentioned with TUSLA. So, you know, today, just to finish up, of course, today we're asked to how we can take political action to counter attacks against the Istanbul Convention and to consider how we can overcome barriers to ratification. And I hope by, you know, given the example of how we really took this on board and the steps we put in place to ensure ratification and now to ensure monitoring are really important. But, you know, a key strategy must surely be to avoid the temptation to argue on the basis of false premises and instead to communicate clearly the purpose and value of the convention. And it's important that we all work to do this within our own countries and in an international basis. And in countries that have not yet ratified the convention or are contemplating withdrawal, we have to work together to counter myths about the convention and to promote its value. I think that the Istanbul Convention has never been more important as a means of promoting best practice to protect victims and punish perpetrators. And of course, it's horrifying that one impact of the pandemic has been an increase in domestic violence globally. We've seen the research that proves that violence against women and girls have intensified. And of course, many of them are imprisoned with their abusers during our lockdowns. In Ireland, we responded very quickly with targeted measures to protect victims. We were able to mount a multi-agency response involving courts, police and support services. So we led the Still Here public awareness campaign in partnership with frontline services to support victims by getting the message out that the supports were still there. And our police service attached the highest priority to domestic abuse through another operation, and court services and the Legal Aid Board prioritise domestic abuse cases. Really, really important. Of course, we need to do more, and we must continue to work hard to get the message out here. We must share our experiences with one another and continue our collaboration to ensure that victims or potential victims of gender-based and domestic violence are not further victimised by what amounts to bad politics. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you very, very much. I believe the best practices are always absolutely crucial, but what you need proper legislation, and of course you have the proper national strategy, and of course it has to start to function, because you have to have you can get the best legislation if nothing happens after. So I strongly believe it was a really great opportunity for all those who are with us in the virtual sphere, you know, just to get notes, good notes of your comments. So thank you very much. And now please stay with us because we have two great other speakers. Our next speaker is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Causes and Consequences, Ms. Reem Al-Salem. And I just would like to let you know that she started her function. She has been appointed in July 2021. And of course, I think it's also important to know that she's an independent consultant on gender issues, the rights of refugees and migrants, transitional justice and humanitarian response. I think it's a very, very important topic. And of course, she has a huge work experience with UN Women, OACHR, UNICEF and IOM, and with UNHCR in 13 different countries. Wow. And of course, giving your extensive experience on the ground, especially with survivors and of gender-based violence. It is an honor to have an exchange of you, and I'm very, very happy that a great professional feminist has got this role. So you, throughout the world, we have seen a strong #MeToo movement denouncing violence against women and of course sexism on the field. How political action further support the #MeToo and make ratification and implementation of the convention a priority? That would be the first question. And another question I also would like to ask is about opposition to gender equality and women's rights, which is on the increase in several Council of Europe member states like my own Hungary. What could you recommend to parliamentarians to counter these negative comments? So the floor is yours, and we are really thrilled that you are here.
Could Ms. Asselam please request the floor?
Yes, so there are some technicalities, sorry to say. Request the list, you push the button, then we accept it, and you can immediately be on the screen.
Sorry?
So normally there is a button on the right of the screen, request list, and then if you push this button, then we need to accept it because this is the way that these techniques function. So I really hope that you can do it. Yes, excellent, excellent, well done. So now I accept it, and immediately you are more than welcome in the virtual sphere of the Council of Europe. Yes. So we see that you might be here in a minute. So let's, absolutely gorgeous. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My apologies for the hiccup just now. And thank you very much also for the invite to participate in this important roundtable and for having me. Well, as you can imagine, actually this topic is very important to my mandate, which considers actually the Istanbul Convention in many ways to be the most recent and detailed instrument on violence against women that we have at the moment. And for us and for previous mandate holders, we see it very much in the special procedure as an instrument that builds really on decades of international law that explicitly recognize that violence against women is a human rights violation that requires coordinated, consistent state action to protect and support victims and punish perpetrators. And that, as Al-Yasir mentioned, alongside also the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Declaration, and the Beijing Platform, it really provides a solid roadmap for the elimination of gender-based violence. And that's why you may recall that when Turkey, the first country to ratify the convention, withdrew from it earlier this year, my predecessor had also expressed profound disappointment at this decision, given that it weakens a set of important protections for women's well-being and safety and leaves them really at risks. And I perhaps would like to highlight here that I have recently requested to visit Turkey, a request that has been accepted by the government, something that I'm very pleased about. And we will just have to see actually the dates for that visit. But of course, there I will be also raising the fate of the Istanbul Convention as part of the agenda of my visit. Now, since you've mentioned the Me Too movement and also the opposition to gender equality, of course, you know, like my predecessors, I'm very concerned about this pushback against gender equality. I'm very concerned about also the pushback against the fight and the collective effort to end violence against women. And in many ways, the pushback against the Istanbul Convention epitomizes this pushback against gender equality. And it is concerning that we see this pushback in many places, and also the pushback against the Istanbul Convention by a number of states that have either signed it and are stalling on ratification, or others that have ratified it but are stalling on the implementation. And in many ways, this actually shouldn't come to any of us as a surprise, because this is, as I said, part of a carefully planned, orchestrated, and also very well funded broader movement pushing against gender equality, pushing against LGBTI rights, pushing against sexual reproductive rights, right to sex education in schools, and also accompanied by attacks against human rights defenders and women human rights defenders in particular that seek to reassert these rights. So there are these efforts to weaken it, and including by non-state actors. And in this respect, for example, I want to highlight the example of a journalist that wanted to publish a story on the convention, and his channel didn't want to run the story, and repeated some of these messages that we hear about the Istanbul Convention, these wrong messages, obviously, that it is a cover to try to attack family rights and the right to a family, and that there is this gender ideology that is being imposed on societies and on them and their children. And of course, this is really concerning. So we must rally to protect the Istanbul Convention, since it's really a solid basis for dealing with new forms of violence, such as online violence. And here I want to really pay tribute to the tremendous efforts that civil society organizations, parliamentarians, human rights defenders, journalists, and really from all walks of society, grassroots organizations, individual citizens, as you mentioned, that have really been the engine that started this Me Too movement. And we have to continue to collectively really to push back and to educate the public, policymakers about violence, and to continue to advocate for improvements in law and in practice, and to also enhance public understanding about the issue, and to clarify some of these misunderstandings and manipulations, if I could call it like this, that are being pushed out. So really no stone should be left unturned in that respect. And there's been many innovative and effective approaches, some of them very sporadic, like the Me Too movement. And as other speakers have mentioned, we should really better document them. We should really better know about them, better share them. We should really, be more organized about these lessons, and about coordinating and sharing them. And we should also continue to use language that is easy to understand when it comes to addressing the false allegations, and that resonate with the individual citizen and with their concerns and their needs. So basically, in other words, I think we need to regain control of the narrative that has been hijacked, and that requires, of course, tailoring the message to the specific audiences and the contexts in which we are operating. So really, there is no one size fits all. And in that respect, for example, the handbook that was put out by the Council of Europe for the parliamentarians is, in my view, an excellent example of these tailored tools and tailored approaches and tailored communication products that we need more of. And I also would like to take this opportunity to say that we should not make a mistake that if the human rights and the protection of women is weakened, everybody's human right is weakened. Nobody remains shielded, nobody remains spared. And I think this is what the wider public and others need to understand. And in that respect, it's not a coincidence, in my view, that right now, as we see a pushback against the Istanbul Convention, we are also starting to see a pushback in some corners of society against the European Convention on Human Rights, and also by some governments. And if anything, that shows that these two things, the wider human rights and women's rights, are very much connected. And then just to say also that from my side, I continue to reassure you of my commitment to support your efforts and everybody else's effort to reaffirm the Istanbul Convention and its place in the human rights framework, and the global effort to protect women against violence. given that it also really builds on CEDAW in many ways, though of course it goes beyond in that it establishes a more detailed catalogue of legally binding obligations to prevent and respond to violence. And as you know, the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, which my mandate is part of, can continue to issue communications and engage state and non-state actors to uphold their human rights responsibilities. And also where the mandate has undertaken visits to countries that have signed or ratified the Istanbul Convention, of course, mandate holders, including my predecessors, have made specific findings and recommendations that have been then included in these reports. And we can therefore continue to be one of the voices that adds to the collective effort. And as you may know, the mandate is leading at the moment this collection of international human rights mechanism, including Grevio, which is called the Edward Platform. And we have used that collective voice of a regional international human rights mechanism actually to also continue to defend the Istanbul Convention and to leverage each other's positions and each other's influences and mandates. And this is very much the way we should continue to work as a collective, and bringing in, of course, all other parts of society, as was mentioned. So with that, I'm going to stop here and happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm really happy that you are here with us. And I'm sure that the last half year has been pretty rich in your work, because the pandemic really showed so much further violence, if I should say so. And I believe that you mentioned how important it is to educate policymakers, and you know, because they really need to understand that this issue cannot be a hidden issue any longer. So thank you very much, and I'm sure that we will come back to these ideas in the discussion. And now I really would like to give the floor for our next speaker, and I know that he already asked the floor. So Nel Data, who is a known feminist actually, and then we already have the first question, which means that we are super active. So as our third speaker today and the last speaker for this morning session is Mr. Nel Data, who is a great friend of us, and I believe that it's not only because he is the secretary of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, but I think you are really dedicated your life for this pretty important issue. So you have long been a very strong and qualified and competent ally of the Council of Europe in its work on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and a great partner for all parliamentarians as well, not only for myself, but for our great chair, Petra, as well. And of course, we are very, very happy to have you us here today as an expert, but also as a feminist man, if I should say so, who is engaged in this area where men are still too few to really step up and be active. So I can tell you that you are one of the role models, you know, how men can deal with this issue from your bottom of the heart. And of course, your attacks against the Istanbul Convention are based on misconceptions and lies about its content. We know very well, but they are manipulating geniusly, like Orban, my own prime minister. And of course, opponents argue that the convention promotes a so-called gender ideology and is contrary to traditional family values. How can the narrative on the convention be changed to not only respond attacks by promote its added value and the advance it represents for women's rights? Could you tell us, please, about your work with the political actors to this end? And of course, I know that you have so many publications, and I'm sure that you're already lucky to know some of them, top of the iceberg, if I just should mention. So in your view, what should political action focus on? And there is one thing which I can tell you as a feminist activist, that we are not loud enough. We need to be more loud if we want women to be listened, that we are on the right side. Because I would say, and again, the Istanbul Convention is the best instrument ever that we had to combat violence against women. So it's a great privilege that you are also here with us, the only man panelist in the morning, but of course I wish to have more men as engaged as you. Thank you very much. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with you. And I wish there were more men involved in this. I don't think it's a phenomenal thing to be involved in something like this. It's really what every decent person should be doing, but okay. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to this network. I've been aware of the network of parliamentarians addressing violence against women for a while, but it's the first time I interact with you. I've decided to focus a little bit my 8-10 minutes by using a PowerPoint and to take a look at what's behind the contestation around the Istanbul Convention. So I see the PowerPoint on my screen. May I ask if everyone also is seeing it?
Yes, we can all see it, I think, Neil. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right. So first, so next slide, please. So we've been discussing about the contestations around the Istanbul Convention, and what I would like us to do is to take a look at what's behind this contestation, because I know very often we know it's there, we describe what they say, their narratives, and all of this, but very often we don't take a look at who are the individuals and organizations really behind this. And for me, this is rather important. It's a bit like discussing climate change without discussing who is behind the climate change. It's the petrol industry, automotive industry, the airplanes, meat consumption, etc. Unless you are able to identify who's behind a certain movement, then we will be limited in how we can neutralize or counter that movement. So here's some examples of recent contestation around the Istanbul Convention. And we can see, from Turkey was evoked earlier, but also Armenia, and then also we have examples from Croatia, which did ratify it, but it was a difficult process in that country. Next slide. First, I would like us to suggest having some clarity about what this contestation and what this mobilization is about and what it is not about. And I have 4 points. First, I would say that it's not about the Istanbul Convention itself. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with the convention as such. It just happens for a certain group of actors that the convention is the easiest target at a certain moment in time in a certain context. Next point is that it is not about a misunderstanding of the word gender. The opponents of the Istanbul Convention, and here I would suggest that we differentiate between 2 types of opponents. One are the artisans of the campaigns against the Istanbul Convention. They are not seeking clarity on the word gender. They know what it means. They also know the fluidity of the term, and they're deliberately using this. And then there's a second group, which is the population in general, or lay people who may fall victim to this confusion. So here we're not dealing with a misunderstanding of the word gender by the artisans of the contestation against the Istanbul Convention. Then a third point, as was mentioned earlier, is that we need to see this as part of the wider contestation around women's rights as such, but also LGBTQI rights, sexual reproductive rights, and a few other areas of human rights. So we can't just isolate Istanbul Convention or GBV in its own little silo. And then finally, this is an important one, I would say that we're not dealing with purely a backlash. This is not a reaction to the progress of women's rights or progressive issues or sexual rights, etc. This is something else and something even bigger. Many academics are now pointing to anti-gender mobilizations being part of a wider illiberal and anti-democratic political agenda. And with this, I'd like to point out to 2 what two women have said recently, who come from very different sides of the political and thought spectrum. One of them is Judith Butler, a well-known feminist academic who a pioneer in gender studies, who herself said that anti-gender issues are being used by the emergent fascist movements appearing all over the world. And from the other side of the political spectrum, I'd like to cite Anne Applebaum. She's American, a speechwriter for the US Republican Party, and the spouse of a conservative Polish MEP, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, who herself said that the authoritarian right is using gender issues as a way of accessing power in a non-democratic manner. So from two different perspectives, we see here that there's a convergence in analysis. Next slide. So who's behind this contestation? Next slide. First, while there's been conservatism, social conservatism in all countries in Europe, well, basically forever, there have been religious actors, etc. In Europe, what we need to see is that there's a new group of actors which have emerged basically over the past 10 years, situated within civil society, which some academics now are calling conservative uncivil society, which are behind much of the contestation around the Istanbul Convention and other human rights. Now, these sets of actors are composed of NGOs, think tanks, social media, legal, and also importantly, legal NGOs, legal organizations. Very often they are religious inspired, but they will present a very secular appearance. Also, another aspect to keep in mind with these ones is that they will be close to the mainstream conservative spectrum, to the conservative world. They will appear respectable, but they all have bridges and links with the emergent alt-right and far-right political parties that we see across most of Europe nowadays. So this is a new set of actors that we need to keep in mind about. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the targets have expanded. So while there's always been a contestation around abortion or sexual reproductive health and rights, now it's also grown to LGBTQ. What interests us for this discussion, gender, such as the Istanbul Convention, but gender studies or anything with the word gender in it. Also, children's rights, and also religious freedom is used as a way to promote certain rights over others, so that the issue of religious freedom would be of a higher order of human rights than the human rights of women or LGBT people. And then we see that all of this, a process of taking religious ideas, secularizing them into human rights sounding language has taken place. And we see this also with the Istanbul Convention. Next slide. So we see two trends in the development of the anti-gender movement in Europe. One is professionalization, another one is transnationalization. So in terms of professionalization, here's an overview of some of the American groups that have set up shop in Europe. One of them I'd like to point out is Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a specialized legal organization. And we can see where they have their offices in Brussels, Strasbourg, Geneva, Vienna, the seats of human rights decision-making institutions. Next, we know that these anti-gender organizations meet. So here's an overview of some of the different networks and fora where they meet. And we know that, for example, with the Istanbul Convention, if you'll remember the first 5 years of the ratification process, it was fairly smooth. There was not much contestation happening. And then something happened where then campaigns started appearing, which we all know what these campaigns are like now. Well, it was in 2016 that a number of these anti-gender actors came together and then identified the Istanbul Convention as problematic and then devised arguments and strategies to neutralize ratification processes. Next slide. So here's an example of some of the legal arguments that were developed by two anti-gender organizations specifically against the Istanbul Convention. One of them was developed by Alliance Defending Freedom, the one to your left, which says the Istanbul Convention an overbroad and unnecessary treaty. This argument was then shared at national level in Bulgaria, Croatia, Armenia, and a number of different countries by They had developed and then they found local partners in order to advance those arguments. Another one coming from Poland, which directly associates that, directly affirms that we need to denounce the Istanbul Convention for the good of the family. And this comes from Ordo Iuris, the same organization behind the legal thinking which led to the complete ban on abortion, the LGBT-free zones, etc., in Poland. So we can see how there's something specific against the Istanbul Convention coming from those actors working to undermine human rights generally and contribute to the de-democratization process in Poland, Alliance Defending Freedom, also specifically with the US Republican Party in the United States. Next slide. So if we take a look at their core ideas and strategies. Next slide. So in terms of strategies, some of the strategies that they've used, and they describe this themselves in a document that they wrote of 140 pages entitled Restoring the Natural Order. They describe how they're going to advance their strategies against all of those 5 issues that I mentioned, not just gender, but all of them, where they position themselves as the new real victims. So remember in Spain, when they were saying that gender-based violence laws were creating specialized courts against men. That's one example of this. Another strategy is framing issues in terms of rights. In this case, for Istanbul Convention, the rights of the family. This Ordo Iuris, the organization which is lobbying against the Istanbul Convention, has itself drafted an alternative to the Istanbul Convention called the Convention on Family Rights. Then another strategy is to damage opponents. So there's the labeling of everyone involved in the Istanbul Convention as part of a nefarious plot called gender ideology. And then more specifically, damaging opponents such as the demonization campaigns against the philanthropy of George Soros. And then becoming a respected interlocutor at national level. One example relevant to the Council of Europe is this one organization I mentioned, Alliance Defending Freedom, tried to obtain participatory status at the Council of Europe just a few years ago, but it was rejected, specifically for its positions on the Istanbul Convention. We see here some of the strategies that they're employing. Next slide. If we then take a look at funding, who's behind the Istanbul mobilizations against the Istanbul Convention and the broader anti-gender movement. Next slide. We did a study, as our chair mentioned earlier in the introduction, our study entitled Tip of the Iceberg, where we took a look at all the anti-gender organizations active in Europe and tracked down their funding. We were able to get financial information for 54 of them. And from that, we're able to see that the whole anti-gender sector as such accounts for at least $700 million over a 10-year period from 2009 to 2018. And now during that period, what can we tell? We can see that the amount of funding increased by a factor of 4 over that decade. So if a certain sector has a quadrupling of its funding, it can do a lot more over the span of that decade. And this is what we're seeing happening with the contestation against the Istanbul Convention. And we can find 3 main geographic sources for the origin of that funding: the United States, mainly the Christian right, Russian Federation, certain very conservative oligarchs, but then Europe itself. And so Europe and actors within Europe are the source of our own contestation against the progressive human rights issues. Next slide. And then I'll end with 2 last slides. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. What we've noticed in terms of the Istanbul Convention and anti-gender in general, but the Istanbul Convention is particularly illustrative, is that these contestations are most impactful when they're able to strike an ambush. So when a certain context is not familiar with the actors and the strategies that are going to be used, they are unprepared for these, and then they can become successful. The best example of this is Bulgaria, specifically with the Istanbul Convention, which Bulgaria was meant to ratify the Istanbul Convention as part of its EU presidency. It was meant to be a straightforward thing. And then out of nowhere, transnational actors appeared in Bulgaria, found local partners, gave them a whole range of toolkits to argue against the Istanbul Convention, and then that is what won the day. And as you know, the highest Bulgarian court ruled that the convention was against the Bulgarian constitution. Another lesson that we've learned is that these anti-gender actors fear the light of day. So the more we know about them, the more we understand, we know their names, who they're connected to, what they have done in the past, the more we're able to limit their damage. And these organizations don't like negative press coverage. And as a result of this, as a result of the reports that we published, we've seen that several of these anti-gender actors have left Brussels and the EU bubble, and they're no longer active as of 2018. So that's one lesson that we can learn. Next slide. And then here, I'll just end with this one about very practical things that all of us can do. One is to identify the specific anti-gender actors in each of our contexts, being mindful that this is dynamic, it can change. We can then set up processes for monitoring these anti-gender actors and their areas of activities. What are they doing? In this country, it's on gender. In another country, it's on abortion. In another one, it's LGBT. But that's simply the low-hanging fruit in any one context. They will be active on any range of different areas if the opportunity presents itself. Another issue is creating a community of allies nationally and transnationally, which share information, intelligence, and have a common understanding about the scale of the problem that we're facing. And then also warning decision makers, which is one reason why I accept decisions such as these to inform an ever-increasing number of people about this anti-gender movement. And then also importantly, building capacity of media so that they understand what's happening, so that when there's a contestation around the Istanbul Convention or another issue in a national context, this is not just a local national issue. There's a national component, but there's also a transnational or international dimension we all need to keep in mind about. And final slide. So I'll just leave you with this. If you're interested in anything more, we have reports, as Madam Chair mentioned, which you can find on our website in several languages. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. So I would say that we always get further and further new information, but I strongly believe that this organization spend a huge amount of money on that, and I think it would be also pretty interesting for our not only for our other speakers, but of course for our colleagues, just to shock them with the money that they are spending on to destroy women's rights and gender equality as such, because of course attacking Istanbul Convention is attacking women's rights and human rights and the LGBTIQ rights. So I think it is pretty, it has to be pretty clear for all of us. But again, if we really would like to be successful in our fight, again, we really need to be better organized and of course just to spread this information for ordinary citizens. And if you allow me, I also would like to make one further comment which has an effect in the European Union member states. The future of Europe debate is going on now. And of course, there is a huge attack on the basic values of the European Union. So I really hope that the end of the future of Europe debate is not going to be a backlash, because we know that there is an attention to make Europe a Christian Europe. And honestly speaking, this is the last century. So we are very, very far away from that. But we know that Orban has a lie. And of course, they spend also a fortune on sorting out information, false information, far away from reality. So thank you very, very much. I just wanted to make this short comment. Now I don't see anybody who is asking the floor. So if you allow me just to give some data, how much these extremist organizations spend on killing women's rights and gender equality and LGBTIQ rights as well, because I think it's also important to take this into consideration.
Yeah, should I say? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So in terms of the funding, okay. What I mean ourselves in this tip of the iceberg report, which if you're interested in this, you can download it in several languages. So at a very conservative minimum, we know that over the past decade, there's $700 million that was spent on this issue. And that's a very conservative minimum, because since then, just in the past month, we know that there have been several tens of millions of euros that have been declared coming from the Hungarian government to different gongos in Hungary, which also advocate anti-human rights positions. Similarly, we've heard of several hundreds of millions of zloty coming from the Polish government to conservative civil society organizations working against human rights. So, I mean, already the figures, the 700 million, just on the basis of most recent information that has come out this month, we could easily at least double this simply from numbers coming from 2 EU member states. Okay. I think also another point to keep in mind is that a lot of this money is public. It is taxpayer money being channeled into conservative, fake civil society organizations, which are then using the tools of democracy to undermine democratic principles and human rights. So I think that's something we need to get our heads around and figure out what we're going to do about this, because the Istanbul Convention is simply the canary in the mine. You know, once that goes, then there's a whole range of different human rights protections that can be unstitched.
Yes, I'm a bit horrified. I know the data, but actually I really wanted to make sure that we really need to repeat and we really need to know what is going on. So probably it would be lovely if you could have a little chat, and we should find some Hungarian MPs and Polish MPs who can ask questions to the government. But let's talk about it later on, because honestly speaking, the taxpayer should know what this money is going on. Dear Alia, the floor is yours, because I see that you would like to make a comment or question.
Yeah, I guess it's a comment and a question, and many thanks for all the interventions. Super interesting and thought-provoking. And I think this challenge to kind of, as also Reem has put, to regain control over the narrative. And you know, you've made some clear recommendations, Neil. But as you were talking, I'm also thinking, as you said, these are legitimate civil society organizations that are using the mechanisms that exist also at all levels, right? Also at the international level and these international convenings, and we're seeing them also gain strength within the Commission on the Status of Women as well, and gaining strength year on year. So I'm trying to imagine how we develop that, you know, political engagement strategy, because it is, I think we do need to have a political engagement strategy that does not alienate, because that can again be used because they're appealing to people's emotions at some level, right? So they have strength amongst segments of populations that feel unrepresented perhaps by what has been in the past the dominant narrative. So how do we not only regain control over the narrative, but how can we make our narrative more encompassing of those that feel represented by these groups, although their interests may not be? How do we bring them in? How do we keep the conversation so that it's not polarizing? Because I think the polarization will work against those of us who are trying to push the agenda forward. So this is a question to all the speakers in this part of the session, but we'd be really interested in sort of unpacking that, because we're trying to from our side. But many thanks. Back to you.
Yes, thank you very, very much. And actually, as I told you, the Hungarian women organization, the European Women's Lobby new president is coming from Hungary. She's going to be here in the afternoon. So probably, I don't know whether Reka Shafran is here. Probably she could also make a comment here. But before Nell, you reply, I kindly ask Rem also to make a comment or question, and then you reply for the two comments and questions. Okay, so Rem, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, Alia sort of said what I wanted to say and address, because I liked, Neil, how you actually differentiated between two kinds of people or parts of this camp on the other side. And there are these well-meaning, let's say, citizens who I think an experience tells us might be persuaded, right? If there are conversations with them. So they are concerned about things that matter to them, about their families, but they are not the manipulative hardliners, right? That have that agenda. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that, if you also know of good initiatives to try to persuade them. And I feel that perhaps the way conversations happen, especially on online platforms, and the very confrontational approach actually is counterproductive to these efforts to try to reach out and really engage them, because they feel attacked, they feel not heard, they feel marginalized. So how do we get around that?
Thank you very, very much. I would say, yeah, these are really very, very tough questions. So now the floor is yours, and I'm asking again if Rika Shafran is here, because I'm also happy if she can make a comment, if it's possible.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I can just share some initial thoughts. I think, as I pointed out, and as we mentioned, it's important to differentiate between different types of actors. One are the artisans of the anti-gender and the Istanbul campaign mobilizations. This, we won't be able to engage with them, okay, because they know fully well what they're doing. But then there's the targets of these of their mobilization, and that's one area where we need to consider. I think maybe improving our narratives, and by that what I mean specifically is making the issue of gender and gender-based violence more accessible to the common public. That's something that we need to take a look at, because I think initially with the Istanbul Convention, it was expected that it would simply go the way of any other international convention, and that is that it would get very little public interest, and it's simply a technical process through parliaments, etc. And no one anticipated, very reasonably, that there would be big public media campaigns around this. So that's something that we need to take a look at. Another thing is that maybe with these conservative uncivil society actors, I would suggest maybe we need to not give them more credibility than they deserve. They have been shunned from a number of different international bodies because they do not respect the founding principles of either the Council of Europe or the United Nations. And we should not be afraid to point this out to them. And as such, they do not necessarily make for suitable dialogue partners. Another thing we need to keep in mind is the strategy of a number of these different actors, so that when it comes to the European Court of Human Rights, on the one hand, we see a number of them engaging in legal processes within the Council of Europe legal framework with the European Court of Human Rights. They're not usually successful, but they're engaging formally with it. And when they realize that they are not being successful, they follow a parallel strategy, which is that of undermining the institution itself. So that one of them came out with a very impressive report, which basically affirmed that all of the judges of the European Court of Human Rights are in some way agents of George Soros because of their previous history in civil society. So I think we need to be clear that their engagement with formal decision-making processes may not be sincere. It's simply a way to do certain things in order to then undermine the overall institution. These are just some initial thoughts.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I don't see anybody to request the floor, so I also would like to ask the same for the three speakers that I have been asked as the first round speakers as well. If you could have a wish list concerning this pretty important topic, what would you wish for 2022? So shall we start with you, Neil?
Okay. Yes. Well, I mean, the overall wish of having more countries ratify the Istanbul Convention, that's already been said in the previous one, so that I'll take that as given. My specific wish list would be for an ever-increasing number of politicians, decision makers, and media to really get who is behind the Istanbul Convention and to and really to show that their basic undemocratic nature, to not give them credibility that they don't deserve. So that like this, when things start happening, the right people are aware from the very start and the correct media coverage is given on this issue. And I think like this, we won't be able to stop them, but we can seriously limit the damage that they can do.
Thank you very, very much. Again, I wish more men, more feminist men who should take this topic as serious as you are. And now Senator Fiona has the floor, and I really hope that Rem is also going to make a wish list for us.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I have to say, it's been really fascinating listening to the two speakers on the panel, and particularly Neil in relation to what he brought to the debate. In terms of my wish list, and it's obviously not dissimilar, as in having more countries ratify the convention and having all of those that have ratified staying within the convention. I think that there possibly needs to be maybe more monitoring, and I think there needs to be collaboration among those that have ratified and have really taken it seriously, such as Ireland has. And I've outlined the different measures that we've taken. I think we need to learn more about how we can act together to try to ensure that the message goes out. There's always a need for more funding, both in terms of providing refuge places, etc. But I think learning about how cultures can change in terms of the prevention is important. And my very last wish would be something like your own, that more men need to be involved and they need to take their role as positive role models very seriously. And I think that that could add something extra to the whole debate. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I really hope that we can tweet all your great comments. And my question, is it okay? So what is the proper pronunciation of your name? Because I don't want to make any mistakes.
Reem.
Reem, okay. So Reem, yeah. Because I feel always very frustrated when they Reem, again, and then, of course, we are looking forward. What are your wish for?
Thank you. Maybe I'll start by seconding the wish list made by the previous two speakers, and to perhaps say that as an alliance of stakeholders and actors that want to continue to defend gender equality and also to prevent violence against women, I would like this alliance to become more sort of aware, more organized, and more anticipatory. You know, I come from a background where I was involved in a lot of emergency response, but also contingency planning. And I think that sort of anticipatory planning, analysis, you know, could be strengthened. We need to be 2 steps ahead, not behind. And for example, in that myriad of things that Neil mentioned about, you know, how they try to find opportunities to weaken it, we now hear about sort of talks in the corridors about the need for a new convention on the elimination of violence against women. And that, for example, would be a way to weaken actually the international human rights framework that we have, that currently exists with CEDAW and others. And and that would actually water down the standards that we have, because even though it's not mentioned there in the CEDAW, but violence against women is accounted for in the recommendations and so on. So how can we remain sort of 2 steps ahead and also and also be well resourced with each other and share more information and really leverage each other's voices and positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say I'm very proud because we have very strong wishes for next year. But I would say that we really need to strengthen to build more alliance, and actually sharing information is also pretty important. Even what Nell just showed us is absolutely crucial, because we really need to follow what is going on, and actually they are really speeding up, not only with pushing further back women's rights and gender equality, but they are spending more and more money on that. So thank you very, very much for all of our 3 great speakers of the second panel, the first 3 panel of our 3 first speakers, and of course all those who could follow us, dear colleagues, dear parliamentarians. And as I told you, unfortunately I can't be with you because we have a parliamentary session in this afternoon, but I really would like to hand over the moderation to Ms. Maria Ruotanen, who is the Director of Committee and of Directorate 2nd Human Dignity and Sustainable Development in the Assembly. I really would like to thank you all. I would say that has been our last session this year with you. I really would like to wish for our Secretariat for the tremendous work that they did during the whole year. Of course, they are always at our disposal, sometimes day and night, so you really need to have a quiet Christmas time and what you spend in your families. And I really hope to see you sometimes end of January when we have the next General Assembly. And again, thanks for the techniques, thanks for the interpreters. And as I believe it's always important to show leadership, to be precise, I'm very thankful that we could also keep the timing as well. So I wish you all the best from the bottom of my heart. And I wish you all Merry Christmas and a more peaceful New Year. Thank you very much again.